a few words about Madhavi madam. She is MD DNB anesthesiology, has done fellowship in chronic pain management from MUHS as well as FIAPM. She is practicing as a visiting consultant in pain medicine department at Lokmanya Tilak Memorial Municipal College and Sion Hospital. She is consultant in pain medicine at Shushruta Hospital, Vikrodi. She also works as an independent pain physician at Mumbai.
Thanks to Dr. Lakshmi for inviting me for such a workshop. And actually, it's my pleasure. I have been trained in Ashirwad Pain Institute as a pain physician, and coming here again was extremely pleasurable. So today's topic is discogenic pain. So the basic definition, what is discogenic pain? It is also the axial back pain, and these terms are commonly used to describe back pain associated with intervertebral disc degeneration without any herniation, anatomical deformity, or any other alternate clear causes of pain and disability. So there are various terminologies for discogenic pain. One of it is internal disc disruption. So discogenic pain can come from late degenerative disc disease or internal disc disruption. So low back pain is one of the major clinical and socio-economic global health burden. The prevalence of low back pain is 31%. The lifetime prevalence in an individual is 60 to 80%. And amongst these, 26 to 40% is the prevalence of discogenic pain. Discogenic back pain is, first of all, multifactorial. It is difficult to identify. Then it is hard to treat, and the treatment strategies are of questionable efficacy. So there are many issues in identifying the discogenic pain, treating it, and the efficacies are also questionable. Lot of debates and lot of papers are there regarding the diagnosis, regarding the treatments over the years. It involves the degenerative changes of intervertebral disc, including structural defects. It results in biomechanical instability and inflammation. It closely intersects with the peripheral and central nervous system to cause nerve sensitization and ingrowth, and thereby central sensitization leading to chronic pain condition. So as you all know, there are 23 discs, 6 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. So why it is important? It is the main prevalence, what is shown is in cervical and lumbar region, the discogenic pain is more, lumbar more than the cervical. Because the mobility of the spine is more in cervical region, wear and tear is more in cervical and lumbar region. So what is intervertebral disc function? Basically it provides, it separates and it connects also in between vertebrae and counteract forces that act to lengthen and as well to compress the spine. It also affects it in a torsional shear manner. Nucleus serves to distribute hydraulic pressure throughout the intervertebral disc by virtue of its high water content. The nucleus can disperse the forces placed on one aspect of a vertebral body to the entire structure. So basically it distributes the pressure throughout the vertebral column. The annulus encircles the nucleus as a cage to provide the structure to the gelatinous form. The radial ply configuration of annulus allows for increased resistance to the compressive forces exerted upon it by nucleus. Now given there is a specific direction for the fibers in annulus, this general rostral and caudal direction of annulus fibers, it resists the torsion, flexion and extension movements of the spine. Intervertebral discs also sufficiently separate the vertebrae to allow the spinal nerves to exit. Now coming to the embryology. The notochord is the embryonic structure common to all vertebrates. So the nucleus arises from the notochord. Okay? The annulus fibrosus they are originated from the mesenchyme surrounding it, as shown in the picture, and while the vertebrae developed from around the notochord from the sclerotom. So why this is important? Because as you see from embryological structure, this notochord, that is the nucleus pulposus, the material which is inside the nucleus, it is not exposed to the body. So whenever there is a disc disruption or disc prolapse or herniation, the material which is present inside the nucleus, it is exposed to the internal immune system, and there is a autoimmune response of the body. That is why it is important to know the embryology. Now, three parts of the intervertebral disc: nucleus pulposus, annulus fibrosus, and cartilaginous plates. So as you can see, this is the gelatinous form. This is the annulus fibrosus. It has inner and outer layer. There is a end plate here and above. Okay. Now coming to the individual structures, nucleus pulposus. It is a gel-like structure, accounts for strength and flexibility of the spine. Water content is 66 to 80%. It also has proteoglycans and 4% collagen. The collagen type which exists in nucleus is type 2. The proteoglycans are aggregans and vedicans. Okay? And these aggregans mainly responsible for water retention. It combines with hyaluronan to form large aggregates, and it raises the load. The other collagen, which are number 6, 9 and 11, they are also present in smaller numbers in nucleus. So this is the basic structure of the nucleus. Now coming to the annulus. So annulus has generally 15 to 25 lamellae, predominantly collagen type 2 inside and collagen type 1 outside annulus. Okay. There are interspread proteoglycans, glycoprotein, elastin fibers, connective tissue in the annulus. It secretes the extracellular matrix. Each lamella differs from adjacent ones by 60 degrees, interconnected by translaminar bridges. Inner annulus cells are described as round and outer annulus cells are more oblong. So the inside structure is of mainly chondrocytes, outside is of fibroblast, which is more tough. Now the coming to the end plate. So cartilaginous end plate connects the intervertebral disc to the vertebral bodies. So these are the vertebral bodies, and cartilaginous disc connects to the vertebral bodies. It has osseous and hyaline cartilaginous layers. Okay. So now just see, this is the nucleus, and this area they have magnified over here. It is mainly the cartilaginous fibers, and outside fibers, the outer annulus is collagen fiber. So the cartilaginous fibers covers nucleus and inner annulus. The collagen fibers covers the outer annulus and anchors to the bone of apophyseal ring. There are round chondrocytes in cartilaginous fibers. They are elongated fibroblasts in collagen fibers. And the main function of this cartilaginous fibers of end plate is providing the nutrition to the nucleus by process of diffusion. So there are the bone marrow arteries which supply to the end plate, subchondrous plate, and by the process of diffusion it will provide the nutrients to the nucleus. Nucleus doesn't have any blood supply. Okay. Innervation of intervertebral disc, which is very important as a pain physician. So as you see, the Bogduk et al. In 1980 wrote a paper on the innervation of intervertebral disc. He mentioned that the posterior aspect, the sinovertebral nerves are present and they supply the outer annulus. Then the gray rami communicans branches, they supply the lateral and posterior lateral aspect, and some post ganglionic sympathetic fibers supply the anterior aspect of the disc. Again same thing, it is the outer third of the annulus which is innervated in normal disc. See, as you can see here, so as the disc degenerates, it penetrates the deeper layers of annulus fibrosis. Not only the nerves penetrate, there is also increased number of receptors and neurotropins present in the disc. This all is basically causes the inflammation and autoimmune response, and discogenic pain happens. Now coming to the blood supply and lymphatics. So intervertebral disc is mainly largely avascular. Only the outer annulus is vascularized. So blood vessel near the disc bone junction of the vertebral body, as well those in the outer annulus, supply nucleus and the inner annulus. Glucose, oxygen and other nutrients reach the avascular region by diffusion, and the same process it removes the metabolites. So why this is important? Because when there is a sclerosis of bone marrow, the vascular supply is impaired, and then the disc degeneration starts. Coming to the epidemiology, there is a strong familiar predisposition in discogenic lumbar pain. The degenerative disc disease is associated with advanced age, particularly between 20 to 50 years. Male predominance over the females. They have also mentioned that smoking is the main predisposing factor. And regarding the particular occupations like prolonged sitting conditions or vibratory forces, the occupation which has main vibratory forces, they expose disc to stresses, favoring the pain, discogenic pain. Mainly truck drivers, manual laborers or office workers or anybody who has to sit for a longer period. The physically strenuous activities, repetitive motion may contribute to the disc degeneration and facilitate annular injury. Now they have done a study that pressure exerted on intervertebral disc in different positions. So the lowest intervertebral disc pressure is in the lying down position, and the highest is when the patient bends down. So this is important in asking history. The patient will tell you that I get pain on bending, I get pain while lifting some heavy weight, and it is relieved by lying down. Even in sitting position the pain is increased. Okay, so this is the thing. The highest pressure is 1324 kilopascals, and in lying down it's much lesser, 91. That's why patient gets relief. And somebody again has done the test, how much the annular fibrosis fibers can withstand the pressure. So they said that more than 10,000 cycles of stress, magnitude of less than or equal to 45% of its ultimate tensile strength it can withstand. Above that it starts disrupting. So now coming to the disease progression, there is the acute phase, subacute phase and the chronic phase. So acute is basically new onset, pain lasting less than 6 weeks. It becomes subacute when it goes beyond 6 weeks but less than 12 weeks, and in chronic conditions it is more than 12 weeks. Now coming to the important part, pathophysiology. So there are subtle changes which happens in the structure of annulus also and nucleus also. There is an imbalance between the anabolism and catabolism. So when the catabolism dominates, there is a accelerated degeneration. Inflammatory cascade is stimulated. Because of this, there is a biochemical response to nerve endings which are present in the annulus. The annular radial fissures they form, and mainly because of the metabolic disorders, nutritional causes or genetic predisposition. Then there is also known that vertical end plate fractures also happen, and all this can cause further to disc bulge and disc protrusion, as you will see in the later lectures. These are the 3 predisposing factors. So they say that patient having diabetes and all, they are more prone for the disc, osteoporosis, some nutritional deficiencies, vitamin D deficiencies, and mechanical is the occupation, those who sustain the continuous stress, compressive or torsional. So now coming to the biomolecular changes. So in normal disc cells, there is a synthesis and there is a breakdown which continuously take place in the matrix, and IVD cells constantly synthesize their own cells and break down also by producing and activating degradative enzymes. So now which are the enzymes which are for degradation and which are the enzymes which are for synthesis? So matrix metalloproteinases is the main enzyme which degrades the cells in the matrix, and insulin like growth factor 1 and transforming growth factor B, they form the synthesis of the new matrix. Now leukotrienes by chemotactic activity produce cytokines like TNF alpha. This is when the inflammation takes place, and interleukins, interferons, they all in turn stimulate the chondrocytes to produce MMPs. So what does MMP do? It degrades the cells. So whenever there is a activation of matrix melanoproteinases, it will degrade the nucleus or the matrix. So now there is an injury or there is a some trauma, these phospholipids they break down into arachidonic acid, further release prostaglandins and leukotrienes. So leukotrienes by chemotactic activity, it attracts the macrophages and they further release cytokines as well as superoxide. So cytokines released are tissue necrotic factor alpha, interleukins and interferons. They further release nitric oxide and MMPs. So the ultimate result is matrix degradation. By superoxide also, it is converted into nitric oxide and peroxynitrite, and there is a matrix degeneration. Now what happens? There is a matrix degeneration. So nucleus proprius now degrades to due to matrix degradation, and it is not able to retain water. So that is the basic ultimate effect. Because of the degradation, it is not able to retain water. Now what happens? It loses its hydrostatic properties. Within nucleus, pressure become unequal and reduced. It is less able to sustain compression load. Now nucleus is not able to take the compression load. So now who will bear the pressure? So the posterior aspect of the annulus takes the pressure. Nucleus can't remain inside the annulus. It starts penetrating into the annular layers. Progressive disruption of annulus takes place. Radial fissures are formed and internal disc disruption. So now they have given various grades for internal disc disruption. So these are the few fibrosis tears: concentric tears, radial tears which we see in disc prolapse, and transverse tears, peripheral tears, rim lesions. Somebody else, Mr. Peng et al. Has classified disruption into two, just for theoretical reason. It is an internal annular disruption or end plate disruption. Now discogenic pain is mainly caused by two ways. It is a mechanical pressure on the nerve by the disc, that is happens when the disc is protruded out and it is compressing the nerve, that is a mechanical pressure, and because of the biochemical changes and autoimmune response, because the nucleus material is exposed to the immune system. So what happens? There is an increased muscle stretch response and ultimately muscle spastic pain happens. Okay. Now coming to the history. How will, suppose the patient comes to you, we have to start with the history. So what is the importance here? There is a cumulative trauma such as repeated small loads like bending, or sustained loads like prolonged sitting. Patient will tell you what is, so you have to ask the profession and the incident, how did it start and all. So discogenic pain is most commonly described as centralized low back pain, usually without referral beyond the buttocks. So pain doesn't generally go beyond the buttocks. It is mainly axial. So they will say बीच में ही दर्द होता है, या it just goes beyond up to buttocks. It is exacerbated by lumbar flexion. So मुझे आगे झुक के पेन होता है. Variable pain mainly axial in nature. Pain is frequently exacerbated by sitting more than standing. में खड़ा रहने से दर्द कम होता है. And is relieved by lying down. So these are the typical history of the patient of discogenic pain. Familial predisposition, 2 or more people in the family having internal disc disruption. So there is a family predisposition. You have to ask about the family history. Metabolic disorders like any diabetes or any other metabolic disorders, nutritional deficiencies. Physical examination, actually it is not so much. There is only paramidline tenderness, like paraspinal muscles might be tender. Range of motion of the lumbar spine may be reduced in all planes. So the movements are restricted. There might be antalgic gait, but strength, sensation and reflexes, all other things are normal. Diagnosis, these are inconclusive, but we have to rule out other things. That's why we ask for CBC, CRP. When there is autoimmune response, naturally CRP interleukins all are going to increase. ESR will increase to rule out infection blood cultures and test for metabolic disorders like diabetes, thyroid, other things. Nothing specific as such. Coming to the plain X-rays. So the signs of early degeneration or late degeneration can be identified on plain X-ray. So what are those? The osteophytes, can you see here? It can be seen on the X-ray. These are the sign of degeneration. Also the height of the disc here, can you see comparatively to over here, the height of the disc is very less. So that is also the sign of degeneration. Now coming to the MRI. So the most commonly seen sign is the high intensity zone, that is the annular tear. Okay, on T2 weighted image you will see the high intensity zone on the posterior aspect of the disc.
That black color.
White. This one. Okay. Then there are modic changes which takes place. On MRI they have been classified according to this table. So there is a hypointense area over near the end plate, and on T2 image it is a hyperintense area. So it will show bone marrow edema. When on T1 image there is a hyperintense, and as well on T2 it will show the fatty replacement. And in type 3 both are hypointense, that will show the subchondral sclerosis. Okay. So these are the modic changes which are commonly seen on
Even type 1, type 2, type 3, like these are the stages like
of modic changes. Okay, how will you identify the modic changes? Modic is the one who has classified. There is a paper. There is also Furman et al. Classification. It is based on the nucleus and annulus, signal intensity and disc height. Okay. So there again grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 and grade 5. So what is grade 1? It is normal, that is the disc has uniform high signal in the nucleus on T2 image. Then can you see this horizontal line of low signal intensity? That is the grade 2. Height is quite normal in all this. Okay. Then in the third grade 3 there is a high intensity in the central part with lower intensity in the peripheral regions of the nucleus. In grade 4 there is a low intensity in the central also and blurring of the distinction between nucleus and annulus. And in grade 5 there is a substantial decrease in the disc height, and there is a homogeneous low signal with no distinction between nucleus and annulus. This is the Furman et al. Classification on MRI.
and T2, T1, like which?
This is T2. This is T2. Now end plate classification. So everybody has their own classification regarding the structures. This is the end plate classification. There are 6 end plate classification. No modic changes in first 3 and modic changes happen in the next 3. Okay. So aging starts from the type 2 and degeneration starts from type 4. So here is the normal disc, normal end plate with no interruption. Second is the thinning of end plates. Can you see this thinning? That is the early degeneration. It's actually very difficult. You have to have very good MRI and so theoretically I am saying then there is a focal end plate defect. Then there is a end plate defect less than 25%, end plate defect more than 50% and is a massive end plate like damage totally. Okay. Now there are again some pictures of degeneration. This is the normal anterior longitudinal ligament you can see, posterior you can see, the normal nucleus pulposus you can see, right? But in early degeneration what happens? There is a dot-like picture in nucleus. Also there is a inward infolding of anterior annulus fibrosus. But I will tell you this is all individual base. You may interpret in a different way, I may interpret. So one has to have a really good MRI reading. So in late degenerative there is a inward pooling of annulus fibrosus. Many times you can see the hyperintense zone of water content in annulus, in nucleus, and there is a gas content, nitrogen gas content. So you can see the hypointense area. So and this is the disc protrusion. You can see the disc in the confined by the posterior longitudinal ligament. So I have to mention one Sharp's fibers also here. These are the structures which are important basically. Now coming to the diagnosis, this is a invasive testing, that is a provocative discography. It's highly debated, highly controversial, and lot of papers on provocative discography. So and it has it is basically the CT guided invasive technique. Contrast is injected in annulus fibrous outer structure, and they have mentioned now, they have come out with the criteria for carrying out provocative discography. For, when you will use, say the results are positive, when the VAS pain score is more than 7 on 10 or there is a elicitation of pain 70% of the highest intensity. The injecting pressure should be less than 50 mmHg over the opening pressure. Contrast volume should be less than 3.5 cc, and there has to be a pain-free control disc at adjacent level. Okay. So why this is, why injecting pressure? Because when you inject with a high pressure, even the normal disc will produce the pain. Okay. Sorry. And this is a modified Dallas discogram. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 and grade 5. Grade 1 is the inner annulus fibrosis, then the intermediate and the outer annulus fibrosis. And this is the last one, is it is coming out of the disc, that is the protrusion of the disc.
So that like only one disc is involved, then only we can do this now, because adjacent is involved.
I will tell you the criteria, I'll come in. It's a highly controversial and debatable invasive testing. The diagnostic criteria, the International Association of the Study of Pain, ISSP, they have given some criteria that lumbar discogenic pain includes reproduction of patient's typical pain with disc stimulation, while injection of 2 adjacent intervertebral discs fails to provide pain. In addition, the pain cannot be ascribed to some other source innervated by the same segments that innervate the symptomatic disc. Also, the International Spine Intervention Society, they have also given the guidelines regarding the positive discography. They have said that the requirements for positive discogram is equal to or more than 7 on 10 concordant pain, or at least 70% reproduction of the worst pain elicited. The pressure should be equal to or less than 50 psi above the opening pressure. Now, what is opening pressure? It is the pressure where you just see the contrast on CT. That is the opening pressure. There has to be grade 3 annular tear and painless control disc. So, in 2018 pain physician paper written by Machikanti, so his conclusion is lumbar provocation discography performed according to International Association for the Study of Pain IASP criteria may be useful tool for evaluating chronic lumbar discogenic pain based on modified best evidence synthesis. The indicated strength of evidence is level 3. They have given level 3 evidence for lumbar discography and for level 4 for cervical discography. The risk factors are, so why one should avoid discography is the first infection. Then is the inflammation, injury to the structures. Instead of diagnosing, you may cause the accelerated of the disruption of intervertebral disc and also the chances of herniation of the disc. Then new innovative non-invasive testing they have come out with, that is the CEST and QCEST MRI, that is the chemical exchange saturation transfer and quantitative chemical exchange saturation transfer. Basically, it is a technique to measure pH dependent signal changes that are known to be important in degeneration. Another newer diagnostic test is GAC-CEST, glycosaminoglycan chemical exchange saturation transfer. Imaging allows the direct measurement and mapping of glycosaminoglycans. It could be a reliable and quantitative technique for assessing intervertebral disc degeneration. It is not commonly done. It is basically for study purpose. So, they have compared the T2 weighted images T1P sequence and the GAC-CEST. So, where there is a grade 4 Fuhrmann's degeneration of the disc, there they have seen the shortened T1P interval and lower GAC-CEST signals. Now, coming to the treatments, conservative treatments first. It includes oral non-narcotic analgesics, physiotherapy, psychotherapy, acupuncture, dry needling and judicious use of spinal orthotics. Remains the first line approach in treatment of algorithm. The CBT and acupuncture dry needling have demonstrated good results with some comparative to surgical treatments. McKenzie method of mechanical diagnosis and therapy, although commonly used for lower back pain, has limited evidence in discogenic pain. So, drugs used mainly non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, opioids many times, muscle relaxants and some neuropathic pain anticonvulsants like pre-GABA, gabapentin, tricyclic antidepressants. But for all this the role is very limited. Coming to the physical and rehabilitation therapy, it is generally in conjunction with other therapies. A systematic review of various physical modalities by Vand et al. In 2011 showed that the only modality with significant effectiveness is multidisciplinarily biopsychosocial rehabilitation, but this has not been used frequently. Education, structure, exercise therapy and behavioral management is preferred due to its low cost. Coming to the intervention therapies, I will just briefly introduce epidural injections, percutaneous intradiscal therapies, regenerative medicine and spinal cord stimulation. In epidural injection, Machikanti in 2015 come out with the paper. There is the evidence that epidural injections are also shown to be superior to fusion and disc arthroplasty. In 2013 paper, they have mentioned that interlaminar epidural better than the caudal epidural for discogenic axial pain. Epidural given with only local anesthetics have better results than epidural with local anesthetics plus steroid at the end of 2 years follow-up. Percutaneous intradiscal therapies, there are heat applications, radio frequency and chemicals. Again, there are many papers and many controversial results also. So, in heat application, thermal annular procedures like intradiscal electrothermal therapy, IDAT and disc trod, which are both are not recommended. And in radio frequency, there is a biaculoplasty, which based on the principle that it coagulates the nerve receptors at posterior annulus fibrosis. The chemicals, there is a methylene blue injection, which has got very limited evidence. So, what is intradiscal biaculoplasty or radio frequency, which is done by many people nowadays? It's an outpatient thermal annular procedure utilizing heat or cooled radio frequency ablation of nociceptive nerves. Desai and colleagues compared intradiscal biaculoplasty and conventional medical management together, demonstrating that long-term clinical effectiveness of combination therapy in pain, function and disability and satisfaction. In 2017, the systematic review, they have given level 1 evidence to percutaneous biaculoplasty. Now, coming to the other, biaculoplasty and intradiscal methylene blue have a weekly positive recommend. Another paper it mentions biaculoplasty and intradiscal methylene blue have a weekly positive recommendation for the treatment of discogenic pain, and nucleoplasty may potentially be a viable treatment, though more evidence and basic research is needed. The evidence of IDET is equivocal, and there are negative recommendations for intradiscal steroids, intradiscal RF, disc trod and L2 blocks and RF. So, everybody, many of them have done many therapies, but nothing has proved to be better. Now, they have come with the DRG stimulation, more study is needed and it looks promising as per this paper. It is come out in 2020 Feb. Then again regenerative medicine therapies. The mesenchymal cells, platelet-rich plasma, bone marrow cells can be used for regenerative medicine therapies. Intradiscal PRP and mesenchymal cells have grade 3 evidence. Biologics study looks promising. Intervertebral disc growth factor injection, transgenic therapy and cell injection therapy. Then last one is the spinal cord stimulation, which is mainly used for chronic low back pain. Including reduction of pain medication, including opiates, improving function and quality of life. In a prospective observational study conducted in Urban Pain Management Center, it was found that spinal cord stimulation may provide effective pain relief, improve disability and reduce opioid usage in patients with discogenic pain as well. Yeah. Then coming to the surgical treatment, I will just mention what the surgeons do. Interbody fusion, prosthesis, replacement and dynamic fixation system.
So, I want to come in here to say that you have seen interventions mentioned in international papers and books. They have completely turned a blind eye to the possibility of any muscle treatment, which in my opinion is sheer folly. They will go and do biaculoplasty, they will do radio frequency of the disc, and then after a few years find that it does not work, but they will not resort to simple things like dry needling. This is because in the first place, people don't know how to do dry needling. And though the pioneers in dry needling techniques were all physicians of very high repute, the people who worked in it, the whole thing started with a British rheumatologist, Kellgren. And he did conclusive studies to say that muscles and fascia are the cause of pain in many conditions. And then after Kellgren's work, there were a lot of followers he had. There was Kerry from Australia, there was Carol Lewitt from Eastern Europe, and then Janet Travel from US, Chan Gun from Canada. All these people did lot of work. All of them are physicians. All of them are academic physicians. And they have done enough work to prove that what we are looking at is something very, very scientific. In fact, Janet Travel was the first lady physician to John F. Kennedy. She was the first person to be appointed to White House as a lady. In spite of all these celebrities being in, in myofascial pains, somehow or the other, the interventional pain physicians seem to ignore this. Ignore it to such an extent that they are doing invasive procedures on patients but will not learn dry needling. And this is something which is completely inexplicable to me, because if you want results, you should do this. I do not know what kind of a prejudice this is. I can only think of the ostrich burying its head in the sand for this thing. So because doctors were doing this, many of the pioneers, especially Chan Gun, resorted to teaching physiotherapists. For physiotherapists, this is something very exciting. Just as spinal cord stimulator may be exciting to a pain physician because it is technologically very complex, or it is not technologically complex. It's simply an epidural needle stuck in the epidural space and a catheter passed. There is nothing sophisticated about the actual, bricks of spinal cord stimulator. But the sophistication is in the gadgetry, and more importantly, it's very expensive and brings in a lot of money. So they are more enamored with that. Pain physicians are enamored with spinal cord stimulations, and now endoscopic spine surgery. And whatever, looks more hi-fi or sophisticated, they will go for it rather than go for something simple. Whereas the same thing in reverse applies to physiotherapists. Their nut and bolt work is myofascial release and electrical modalities and exercises. For them, sticking a few needles into a patient is very high sophistication for them. So they are very excited to do dry needling, and they are the ones who very enthusiastically accepted the dry needling lessons given by Chan Gun, which also got recognition. And so they do it. Now, the tragedy of it is the physiotherapist's understanding of dry needling is limited by their own limitations. What I mean by that is they don't have ultrasound, so they are blind. So blind dry needling, I have already said what are all the problems. As a result, they are very limited, and they limit themselves to only painful points, myofascial trigger points in the muscle. So they have never explored the possibility of the enormity of myofascial pains, which somehow or the other, I seem to be the only one who has stumbled onto this particular thing, that don't look at only myofascial pain at the myofascial trigger points. There are many more trigger points in the same muscle that you are needling. There are also trigger points in the co-working muscles. And then there is a connection between motor neuropathy and myofascial pain. So the enormity of the whole problem has just not been realized. And this is the reason why we, at an international level, we talk of all kinds of interventions, but we do not talk about dry needling. Now, if you look at the efficacy of dry needling vis-a-vis the interventions, it is zameen asman ka farak hai. The kind of results that we get with dry needling, they can never ever hope to get with spinal cord stimulator or whatever else they do. So this is what I wanted to emphasize here. And Madhavi, I would like you to stress the disc pressures in standing, sitting. You have done that. You have shown it. Yeah. I want you to show it again so that it registers in their minds as to how important it is. Sitting disc pressure is far higher than standing disc pressure. Walking disc pressure, probably nobody has done it. Walking may be even less than the standing pressure. And if you ask a discogenic pain patient, the thing that they dread most is the first thing when they wake up in the morning and they have to go and brush their teeth. Because in that position, they are just bending just this much to spit into the sink or pick up a brush or whatever. That is their worst pain in the day. So all these disc pressures are very important in the genesis of this pain. Lying down pressure is 91. The standing pressure is 939,
एक minute.
or rather 539.
Okay, these are the pressures in different positions. Somebody has studied the pressure exerted on intervertebral disc in various positions. The lowest pressure on IVD is in lying down position, that is the 91 kPa, kilopascal. And in bending, it is 1324, almost 130 to 140% high. So that is the history. In history, this point has to be asked. If patient says pain increases on bending or and on sitting, and it is relieved in lying down position, or standing position is better than sitting, you can think in your mind that discogenic pain may be coming into picture.
So I asked her to repeat this because I want this to register in your minds, these pressures. This will have a relevance when I give my talk. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, you went away from that? Okay, go in this. Okay, next. Okay, I think you go back to your original slide. So, see, lumbar canal stenosis, I think there is somebody talking about it.
Yeah.
But in brief, I will tell you that lumbar canal stenosis is a combination of discogenic and facetogenic problems, and many other things which come in. There is ligamentous degeneration, there is regeneration of, or other degenerative disc processes which cause nerve growing into the disc and all those things. Everything comes together in lumbar canal stenosis because these are old people. Okay.
Okay, now chronic lumbar pain and myofascial interrelation. The primary factors for developing low back pain are damage to soft tissues of the trunk, weakening of muscles, and leading to pain, decreased muscle endurance and flexibility, and restriction of the spinal movement. So, deep layer of lumbar spine muscles of low back pain patients experience more atrophy. Paraspinal muscles, psoas major, the contraction speed of these muscles is also decreased, and such damage and muscle weakening give rise to disc degeneration and cause pain and instability. And it is also vice versa. Once the disc degeneration is progressed, the deep intrinsic muscles undergo atrophy, taking on a major role in destabilizing the spine. The strengthening these deep muscles helps in stabilizing the spine quickly. This is the paper in 2014. Now, what is the role of dry needling in discogenic pain? The functional spinal unit, it consists of intervertebral disc, vertebral body, as well as the attached soft tissue such as ligaments and muscles. So, any of these things can cause discogenic pain, pain basically. The status of muscle and ligaments laxity may have an association with prevalence of the lumbar disc disease, with significantly higher prevalence of the lumbar disc herniation and also worse clinical and radiological outcomes. The myofascial trigger points are generally found in psoas, erector spinae group of muscles, inner paraspinal muscles like multifidus, intrus transversi, quadratus lumborum, and ligamentous structures. So, dry needling has a role in arresting this progressive disease by strengthening the muscles which support the vertebral functional unit and helps in the movement and share the torsional forces acting on the intervertebral disc. It also reduces the myofascial trigger point, so pain intensity goes down, the muscle spasm go down. The functional improvements of the spine takes place, and thereby quality of life of the patient also improves. It is easy to perform, it is cost effective, it is less interference with the body biomechanical function, it is benign treatment with no pharmacological interference. So, the dry needling has a promising role in dealing with the discogenic lumbar pain where no other intervention has clear cut shown the evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhavi madam. So we are ready for question and answer section. Anyone has any question can ask.
Okay. So I wanted to know that if discogenic back pain has been treated with an intervention, then how do we come to know that the myofascial and there is a residual pain left? How do we how do we judge that this patient will be benefited by dry needling? If there is any, so do we see any tenderness in the paraspinal muscle which lets us know that there are some trigger and which needs dry needling, or it's just residual pain which we will treat with it?
I didn't get the question first.
Her question is, somebody has had intervention. They haven't got relief. How do you assume in this case that there is myofascial pain?
So you find the tenderness over the muscles. And
See, it is like this. A patient says, I had the block, बैठे बैठे थोड़ा बहुत आराम हो गया है, but I am not able to bend. I am not able to stand. I am not able to turn sides in bed, which means all these are because of myofascial trigger points in the muscles, which are being not both spontaneously painful, and which is the active myofascial trigger point, and the latent trigger points which hurt on muscle movement and by pressure. See, what you
Tenderness.
elicit as pressure or tenderness is the same thing is mimicked when the patient moves, okay, because the muscle is being pressed by the movement. And as a result, when the patient bends, which are the muscles which are coming into action? The psoas. And then what is being opposed? The erector spinae, the quadratus lumborum. So the patient will say, I'm getting pain in the center of my back, especially just over the sacrum. This is the most common complaint, most common complaint. They will not talk about anything other than the pain just at the origin of erector spinae. And then they cannot say much about the psoas pain because they cannot describe it really. But the quadratus lumborum pain, they'll say it is something at the side of the back, paraspinal pain, which is going into the buttocks. And so these are telltale indications for you that there is myofascial pain. There are myofascial triggers. So now, if you are a physiotherapist, you will want proof by doing the jump test and pressure and all that. What I say is, movement pain indicates that there is a myofascial trigger point. Go ahead and do the needling. So, to answer your question in short, if the patient has persistent pain, persistent limitation of movements after the intervention, that means myofascial pains are there. Now, where do you go and needle will be dependent on your understanding of which muscles are involved. So what I have said is, I have laid a protocol for back pain needling where you address the three components of erector spinae, the quadratus lumborum, the psoas. Then the buttock needling where you individually address the gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, gluteus minimus and piriformis and gemelli. This is the buttock muscles to be needled. Then you go to the pillars on which the back rests, that is the thighs, where you do adductors, hamstrings and the vasti. The vasti, vastus lateralis and intermedius are far more important than the rectus and others, but you can do it one or two sessions. Then calf muscles, extremely important. Calf muscles and peroneal, extremely important. So if you do all these, you put needles in each one of them and you will know when you put needles if the patient gets pain. See, if you have ultrasound, you will see LTRs, which is objective proof for you. But if you don't have ultrasound for every needling and you have documented the depths of all muscles so that it is still ultrasound guided dry needling, but you're doing only a blind needling. That, when I say blind, you are still having vision because somebody has determined the depths of these muscles in these patients. And then when you do this, if you might see LTRs through the skin, if they are powerful LTRs, which you do see quite often. And especially adductor magnus, the whole thigh will jump. And if not, the patient's complaint of pain when you put the needle is itself an indication that these muscles are involved. Wherever your needle goes in like butter, the patient has no problem with you. He's very happy with you that you're needling an area which is painless. That is a useless needling. Where he gets pain is the one which will give you results. So this is proof in itself that there is myofascial pain. And you simply continue with this. And you go by what the patient says. Within 3 sessions, your patient has to do clinically well.
And
He will do well.
In specifically chronic pain, the muscles become tight also. So needling will help in releasing and relaxing the muscle.
Yeah. What she said is a very important point, that the patient's understanding is that he says there is pain. But your understanding comes in the education of your hand. This is where you as an anesthetist are very important, because only anesthetists have this kind of sensitive hands. We have sensitized our hands to resistance and loss of resistance in epidural. So when you do dry needling, you will find areas of the types of resistance that you encounter when you do dry needling. So let me explain this to you. One is where the skin itself is so tight you cannot get in. This is the dermal motor elements being tight. And sometimes when you put these needles, some points on the skin, the patient literally screams because they get a severe searing, burning type of pain just in the skin. Your needle will be actually hanging around, latakta hoga, but they get pain in that. But after 2-3 minutes, the whole thing relaxes and your needle can go in. This is one type of a muscle resistance that you encounter during dry needling. The other thing is, you go into a muscle, when you go through a fascia, there is a small tightness, but after that the muscle feels like butter. This is another type. And then as you go in, you will go through a taut band and there will be a slight resistance and then a loss of resistance. Somebody described it I think it was Sushma who described it once. It is like puchuk puchuk. You get bands of resistance and loss of resistance. This is another type. In fact, these are very painful. And then you have chronic patients where there is a steady resistance. It's like you are going through a very, very much hardened cheese, as it were. So you have a continuous resistance. And in this kind of a case, you leave the needle in. You introduce 1 centimeter, leave it in, go to another needle, 2-3 needles and come back. You will find that the original needle is going in happily. And then you come into the CRPS kind of muscles or severe neuropathic pain patients. Those are like rock hard almost. The needle just will not enter. So you have to wait and then it will go in. So see, this changing resistances that you see in the muscle is something that you have to do the needling and educate your hand. The more senior you are, the better your appreciation, and more thinking and a pain specialist, better your understanding. The more, what shall I say, scientific minded you are, the more explanations you will try to find for the findings of dry needling. So this is a huge topic in itself, which I cannot talk to someone who has never held a needle in his hand. This has to be for a person who knows how to do dry needling. And then there is yet another situation where as the needle goes, there is a grating sensation, khar 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 kind of a sensation. See, if you people work with me for a month or 2 or 3 months would be ideal, that then I can show you all these needle findings, resistance, the, grating sensation, the puchuk puchuk kind, and the hard muscle. All these things, as I'm doing in a patient, I can make you feel it. I simply, the moment I detect it, I put another needle in the same muscle and you can see it. This is something which has to be hands-on. I cannot teach you in a workshop. This has to be learnt by your own swa anubhav. This is like spirituality. Only you have to experience it. And you try to explain this to someone who has never held a needle in his hand, he will think you're talking rubbish. Just as he will think that when you talk about reference of pain from a central myofascial trigger to a satellite myofascial trigger, how burning sensation responds to needling, or how insect crawling sensation responds to dry needling. He has never seen anything like that. This is exactly like spirituality. A spiritually realized master will say, everything is, sarvam brahmamayam jagat. To me and you, where Brahma, where Jagat? They are two very different entities. So it is like that. So when you have seen it for yourself, everything becomes extremely clear. But if you have never seen it, I'm just talking. And you will say this madam is obsessive compulsive about dry needling. That is because maybe she doesn't know how to do spinal cord stimulator, or maybe she doesn't know how to do discectomy. That is why. It is human nature to think that when they say something that you do not know, it is better to say that I am smart and she doesn't know and she is stupid. This is human nature. Okay? So that's how it is. I think that's a very long answer to a short question. Next, whoever wants to ask.
Lakshmi?
Yes, please. Yes, Mary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Can I just have a word here?
Sure, please.
Just to corroborate what Lakshmi said.
Just a second. Mary is a person who's an ardent dry needling expert now. She is a reputed neuroanesthetist, one of the founding members of the Neuroanesthesia Society. So you cannot find someone who's more scientifically oriented than Mary. So now she will talk about dry needling to you. Please go ahead, Mary.
Yeah. Hi. It's a pleasure to attend this workshop. And I'm Lakshmi's classmate from Bangalore Medical College. But she's my teacher, the guru also. Although we were classmates, now she's my guru where dry needling is concerned. Whatever I learned is from her. I was visiting her clinic in Ashirwad. Whenever I used to go to Bombay, I would take it opportunity with her. And now I find that has now formed the basics of my pain management therapy. Just to talk about this, I don't want to take too much time, but I just want one experience I want to share with a patient who had a very severe prolapse with this 50-year-old lady. She came literally bent on a wheelchair, could not even stand on one leg. She just could not stand on her right leg, right or left, I'm not sure which one. And she just told me one thing, and this was during these COVID times, so she said, I don't want to go to a surgeon, मुझे कुछ नहीं करना है, what you do, I'll be happy with what you do. Now what I'm trying to tell you is the power of that needle, She came, she could not even, I could not make her do any neurological test. SLR I could not do. She could not even put her leg straight. She was flexing her leg. It was that bad. And after one session of needling, she just bounced out of bed and walked out and the lady who could not even stand on her own, she had to be helped on the wheelchair, she walked out of my physiotherapy clinic. And I took a video of that also. Her daughter was surprised at how is she doing that? And she tells me that after each session, the loosening she felt was just enormous. And this is not one, I've done a few people like this, where you have such dramatic results after just that needling session. And this lady ultimately started walking 45 minutes in a month or two without anything. Of course, I had to give her a root block also because she developed pain on the other side as well, because she had a disc on the other side also. But what I'm saying is dry needling did wonders for this lady. I don't think she went back to the surgery. She didn't want any surgery also done in the hospital. So I can just tell you that it is really a very useful tool, even for just prolapse. And you won't believe this lady had a foot drop. She could not put a slipper. She could not lift her, the dorsiflexion was impaired, EHL was impaired. And she could, ultimately, I needed even her perona, and according to Lakshmi, as you take advice from her, I needed her leg muscles her anterior and lateral compartment, and her foot drop also improved. That's all. I don't want to take any more time. I just want to tell you that I can totally vouch for dry needling for prolapse.
Thank you, Mary. She has brought out very important points. What is considered as a purely neurological symptom, she could reverse. That is the foot drop, which is one of the most recalcitrant problems of any nerve damage. It is a nerve damage which happens because of the entrapment of the common peroneal or the common peroneal nerve at the back of the leg or on the side of the leg. So when you do needling, you are releasing these muscles and the entrapment factor comes down, and this allows probably a revascularization of the vasa nervorum in these nerves, and that is how the nerves regenerate. This is how I have rationalized it to myself, because these are findings that it's very difficult to explain these. And these are human beings where you cannot take a biopsy before and after and see what is happening. You have only the clinical finding to go by. And another important thing I wanted to bring out, Mary, please share your video of this patient. We'll try to play it during this workshop itself. If you can share it with Varsha, she will put it up so that they can see it. And number two is, I don't know whether you have the pre-video. This is the problem with all of us.
I have the MRI also.
Yeah, very good. Put that also.
I have the MRI also.
Okay. See, this is a learning point for all of you. Whenever you see a patient who's very bad like this, record it pre-procedure also. Because the patient is in distress, you are in a hurry to do something, you are distressed because you want to relieve this patient. So many times, the pre-treatment videos are not taken. Just spare 5 minutes and document. And then post-treatment videos are always available to us. So if you document pre and post, and we generate a database which is very, very convincing, maybe down the line I will start an ultrasound guided, video journal. We can start a dry needling journal itself. Since anyway, most of the journals don't accept half of our papers. And this, I'm not saying that they are prejudiced. This is because they have never held a needle in their hands. So they believe that what they know is all there is to know, and that there is no other truth available. Once again, I'm going into the philosophical aspect. I don't want to go there, but this is human nature. What you do not know, you believe that it is someone else's lacuna. And this defies my understanding, because science is all about curiosity and open-mindedness. Whoever comes and tells me that this works, madam, I will try it first before telling him that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I will try it, and if it works with me, I will call that person and say, hey, whatever you said worked. But whatever does not work, I will probably go and tell him, I don't know, maybe I didn't do it right, maybe can you tell me what to do about this? If the second and third time it doesn't work, I will have to dismiss that person as talking through his hat. But science is all about being open. So all I'm asking people is to be open-minded. I sent papers to the Indian Journal of Pain, which came back within, I think probably within a week, saying that the reviewing was over. The only comment was, this is unscientific. What is unscientific? I do not understand. I'm quoting papers, I'm giving you videos, I'm giving pre-post pictures. How much more science do you want? Do you think only spinal cord stimulator is science? Do you think only steroid injection into the spinal canal is science? What do you define as science? Anything that works. And anything which is explainable by logical thought is science. If you think this is not science, I'm sorry, I think you don't know what is science. So, but anyway, unfortunately, the point I'm coming back to is that please document your patients. And probably we'll have a group which will come out with its own journal for whoever wants to read, so that we can all share our findings. It will form a piece of documented evidence of this therapy, maybe the future will be kinder to pain patients than the present generation, who would rather be unkind to the patients but be sophisticated themselves. Let us have a group of people who are empathetic to patients and produce results. Thank you.